What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favali, coming at you with the one, the only, my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We're here to talk about the latest NBA gambling scandal, or a NBA gambling scandal, however you want to frame it. We're going to go through with the major individuals involved so far. We'll break it down. We'll give you the cliff notes of what's happening and our thoughts on them. But first and foremost, Grant, how the heck are you doing? You
I'm
build any
feeling
wicked
lucky.
parlays before you're
Feeling lucky, Dan. Just ready to throw some yeah. We do need to talk about this. So I guess before we get into some of the particulars and we'll break it down, as a preliminary matter, when this story dropped, what was your first interaction with it, and what was your first how did you come across it, and then what was your very first thought as you see Chauncey Billups, Terry Rozier indicted or arrested? I think was the first thing I saw, which that piqued my interest.
I first saw it because the Shams notification popped up on my phone, as I find out about most things. And my reaction to it was, I don't want to say it was indifference, but it's not something that I found shocking. And I was almost, I guess, not surprised at how big of a deal, not to downplay the significance of it, but even the Terry Rozier stuff specifically, we didn't learn much about, aside from the anecdote that he may have, and we're going to get into it, but he may have paid for someone to drive somewhere to collect the money so they go count it at his house. I guess it didn't move me the same way other people did. And there's also, and this is probably the spot to put this, and so it could weed out anyone who's not going to come into this with an open mind. I want to be inherently skeptical of anything coming out of the mouth from anyone associated with this current administration, because why was Patel up in his FBI raid jacket up there giving notes on this? I just didn't. It seemed to scale above the level that this was, especially when one of the individuals involved, or one of the primary matters, like the Terry Rozier thing, I don't want to say it was old news, but it was. We knew most of it. Yeah. So, and just the Toronto Rangers, maybe don't have ChatGPT, right? Your element from there. And just, I don't know. You had said this in our Discord too when it first came up. I will just reiterate. I'm inherently skeptical, and I want to wait and see more. The people who were involved, Terry Rozier has already been linked to it. So no, this doesn't surprise me that his name was there. We know about Chauncey Billups and the rape allegations from previously. It was made, it became a headline story again when he was hired as the coach of the Portland Trailblazers, and now it's kind of faded into the background because that's how the news cycle works. That's not, he was playing poker and might have passed on information. We're going to get into all the individual things. So that, it wasn't shocking. And so I want to wait to hear just more information. I'm sure I don't think they were up there making things up. They clearly have to have something. And look, the Terry Rozier stuff was already just in the ether, but I haven't seen anything or read anything that makes me think, okay, yes, if it's true, these players, these individuals they need to be banned. Terry Rozier, Chauncey Billups, they need to be banned. And quite frankly, I think that's how this is all going to end, just to kind of spoil before we even get into it. But that's what I had a tough time reconciling, is how we're sitting there, we're just taking everything that's being said at face value given the source here. That was one of my first reactions.
I would echo basically all of that, and I felt similarly. One of the only other difference was I didn't get a Shams notification. I opened up the New York Times on my phone, and this was the top story, and I was just like, so there's no news today, I guess, was my first thought. I was like, how is this the banner, your A1? And then that ties to the skepticism about where this is coming from, and just that's interesting that this is being pushed as a major story now when, I don't know, there's a few other things that seem like bigger deals. Maybe that's just a few, I just felt like maybe some part of that is me trying to minimize how big a deal this is, because I don't know how you feel, but on some level, if it is true that on a much wider scale the competitive integrity of NBA basketball is compromised, it's not good for me, it's not good for us, it's not good for our industry. But that was a second or third thought after, really, this, and it's the way it was packaged as this is all one thing, as opposed to once you read a little more carefully how separate a lot of this was. So yeah, some skepticism for sure, but mostly just kind of bewilderment that this is our top story with where we are in the world today.
And I think it probably also it's more about where do you land on sports betting in general, which is probably what this discussion turns into as we move through it. But I think let's begin with, you mentioned integrity of the game. The Terry Rozier allegations are the one in theory that would impact the integrity of the game. So I'll take us through those. If you're on YouTube, you can see it on screen. We have most of our notes in a doc because it's already kind of cramped on screen as it is. But the indictment accuses Terry Rozier of participating in an illegal sports betting scheme using insider NBA information. As part of the scheme, gamblers used non-public info to bet on at least 7 NBA teams between March 2023 and March 2024. Those games involved the Hornets, the Magic, the Blazers, the Lakers, and the Toronto Raptors. This is linked to Toronto Rangers, excuse me. And this is under the same umbrella as the Jonte Porter allegations that he was, I guess it was proven enough and he pled guilty. He is now banned from the NBA for life. 6 defendants are named as part of this gambling scheme. And because it was tied, I think, as you said before, it was tough to it felt like they were inextricably tied together, the poker, like the illegal gambling with the poker and then going on with sports betting. 31 people were named in the poker scheme, but 6 defendants were named as part of this sports betting scheme that involved Terry Rozier. The allegations are that when he was with the Hornets in March 2023, he allegedly told a co-defendant and a childhood friend, De Niro Laster, that Rozier would remove himself from a game against the Pelicans in the first quarter due to a supposed injury. Laster then allegedly sold that information to 2 bettors for about $100,000. From there, Rozier allegedly removed himself from the game after 9 minutes. He finished with like 5 points, 2 assists, whatever it was. Using a network of associates then, the people who presumably bought the information wagered hundreds of thousands of dollars on Rozier's unders, which cashed because he pulled himself after, I have it written, 5 points, 2 assists, and 4 rebounds. After this, Rozier allegedly paid for Laster to travel to Philly to collect, quote, proceeds from the scheme. Laster then apparently drove to Rozier's home so they could count the money with him. And I think there is 2 big takeaways from this just before I throw it to you. This is the one, more so than Chauncey Billups or Damon Jones passing along non-public information, which eventually becomes public anyway. This is the one that impacts the integrity of the game more than anything because it involved a player who, a significant player at the time, this was the season that Rozier was averaging 34 or 35 minutes per game for the Hornets, removing himself from a game. So this isn't Jonte Porter, a player who's on a 2-way contract. This is someone who is a core part of his team at that time. And that's where I think the real concern starts to creep in throughout all of this, is that, and I'm not trying to minimize the other allegations, but this is, if you had to focus on one, like this is the one that, and we already knew most of this, this is the one I was hyper-focused on.
I agree with that. I think this feels different. One, not new. Rozier's name had come up, I don't know when, a long time ago, with basically this exact set of allegations. But 2, right, I agree that if you're the NBA, I think there's an argument to be made that this feels like a bigger problem because it goes directly to competitive integrity. It goes directly to a player who is totally in control of his production, managing that for reasons that have nothing to do with whether his team will win or lose the game. And that touches on just like the absolute core of sports and like why we're interested in it. Like we need to believe that it is being played by players who are trying to win the game. So as opposed to whatever this was, trying to help hit unders. I think the counter to that might be Rozier doesn't have the same level of like overall influence as say a coach might. And so even though you could see how the Chauncey Billups inclusion in this kind of lumped together set of indictments might seem like a bigger deal just because in theory a coach can play or not play players, can dictate strategy, could pull different levers than just an individual player. I still think this feels different. This feels worse, if what is alleged here is true, than anything else that we've come across in all this reporting. I think another aspect of this that's interesting to me, or maybe I'll throw it to you, like you mentioned Jonte Porter. It's sort of easier to understand the motivation of someone that does not have an established NBA career and or a big NBA salary, like chasing the money here, because a few $100,000 to him is real. To Terry Rozier, who I don't know what his deal was, but he's making mid-20s, mid-20 millions, right?
I think that was the first year, I think, of his current 4-year contract, right?
Okay.
So he was, 4-year, $96 million, and he was on 20. That was the first year of it, 21.5. And it's, by the way, it wasn't like he was earning his rookie scale before that. He had made about an average of 18 million in each of the previous 3 seasons.
Yeah, and so what that fact does is put the lie to a defense that these players make so much money they'll never try anything untoward, because like a few $100,000 is nothing to them. Because now you can point to Terry Rozier and say, well, he was on a $90 million contract and still was manipulating his performance for a few $100,000. Like that's another level here that's problematic, right? Because you can't just shut
makes you
everything
think
down.
Anyone then is what the thought. I know that there are players who are paid more than Terry Rozier, and there are players who make way more off the court. So this doesn't rise to a level of, why would LeBron James ever do this as a $1 billion athlete? I think you could have said the same thing for the time period. Why did Michael Jordan feel the need to gamble or play a bunch of poker when he was in the NBA? This is something that interests people. It's something that can become a problem. We don't know. Just the other thing would be, and people have speculated it, is kind of been, did they just did they have gambling debts, and this is something that they needed to do to clear them? It doesn't get into that. We don't know. That's why I want to know more information. And to your point, by the way, about people latching on to the Billups one of it all, I think that also speaks to that was the new wrinkle in this. And Chauncey Billups, not only is he an active head coach, but he's just a bigger name than Damon Jones, or he's a bigger name than Terry Rozier. He's an NBA champion and he's a Hall of Famer. So this is that's what's tough for my brain to square around. And it's Terry Rozier's lawyer camp comes out and forcefully just rebukes and says that they were doing this for show. The administration wanted to put, his head on a spike, basically. Like, they want to make these high-profile arrests. I do think that's true of any administration, is like they want to show they're making high-profile arrests. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's when you bring up the aspect of what he was making, what is your incentive or reasoning for doing this? And that part of paying for someone to go collect, how much was it? They don't really get it, or at least I haven't seen them getting into the specific amounts that you can go count it at your house. Like, why are you, as Terry Rozier, who at that point, so forget about what he's earning that season and in the future, has already made over $60 million. Like, why is that? And you're guaranteed. His contract was partially guaranteed in the final season. He was still guaranteed basically $90 million or whatever it was. Yeah. I don't understand the incentive there.
No, and it you just have to get into speculation, and we've done some of it. And if you're associating with these kinds of people, maybe they're able to exercise leverage on you that makes you act in ways that you logically otherwise wouldn't, right? Like, that's a possibility, depending on who he'd come across in the gambling world. Like, that's on the table. I agree. I don't think either of us is saying we don't believe this because he's making so much money. I think what the point to take away is that you don't get to say, well, because he's making so much money, player X would never have done this, right?
Right.
Like that argument loses steam. If you want to move on to Billups, I can kind of go through what was alleged here.
Very quickly, can we talk about, is that good or bad brand marketing to have a Clutch Sports Group sweatshirt on as he's like walking out of that picture?
I clocked that too. I thought that was like okay. Maybe a different sweatshirt. So Chauncey Billups is not named in the indictment of Terry Rozier that's centered on sports betting. He does match down to it's one of those gee, who could this be? Descriptions of co-conspirator 8. He is described as a resident of Oregon who played in the NBA from 1997 through 2014 and has been a coach since 2021. All right. Co-conspirator 8 allegedly told Eric Ernest that the Blazers would be resting top players on March 24th, 2023. Of note, Eric Ernest was also indicted in the gambling scheme to defraud card players in poker games that were said to have involved numerous members of the Bonanno, Gambino, Lucchese, and Genovese crime families.
I have this sudden urge to watch Goodfellas.
Yeah, right? You see those names, again, throwing the names in the indictment is also kind of like, okay, FBI, we get it. This is a big show. So to me, I'll just, before I throw it to you, this is separate from what's alleged with Terry Rozier, aside from, I guess, some tangential links, right? Or maybe entirely. And the poker game of it all is also something that, as more people have read the indictments and like just looked back at the news, like the poker game was a known thing, or at least it was, people in Billups' circle and NBA circles were aware that there was a poker game that Chauncey Billups was involved in that was, I forget the exact verbiage, but was like, you're going to want to stay away from that, is kind of the vibe that people had around it. But just to be clear, this is one of the things that threw me upon reading a little more, is that, okay, this is basically a separate thing from the Rozier stuff. And it certainly paints Billups in a light that is like, oh, he's in trouble, or co-conspirator 8 is in trouble for the same stuff, right? Like, isn't that the feel that you sort of got initially? It's just like co-conspirator 8 / Billups was just named in all the reporting, so I'll stop with that. Billups and Rozier indicted in federal gambling fraud probe, whatever. It was like, oh shit, like it's all connected. It doesn't, unless I'm missing a lot, it's not quite that clear.
No, it's not. But what I will say that I don't think was receiving enough attention, and maybe it did, and I'm just not consuming enough of that content. So people have made the point that if you're just talking to someone, and this is Chauncey Billups, just as the example, you are a coach of a team, and if you're just letting a friend in your life know Dame's not going to play tonight, that's just might come up in conversation. If you don't know they're going to go use that, sell that information, or use it to make money themselves in some way and place bets, is like, what is your culpability there? Everything is presumed innocent until proven guilty, but he's linked to Eric Ernest with the poker game too. And so if he actually told Ernest this, if that's the one he's passing the information to, you have no cover, right? Because you already know that this character is linked to, unless your argument is, well, I was never at a poker game, I had no idea that those existed. Yeah. So the fact that he is tied to that person specifically in both of these instances, that's what I clocked the most out of this. And when I came away from it, it was sort of, I don't want to get, oh, he definitely did it, but I was just, oh, if this is all true, this is too much smoke. I don't know what his cover would be.
I think another element of this that we're kind of brushing up against is from the NBA side, and Seth Partnow mentioned this, he's worked for teams, that you get instructed more than once in the course of every season as players, staff, coaches, that among the sort of acts that are no-nos, that aren't technically gambling, is exactly this, like tipping, like it's called, tipping, telling people outside the sphere of the team, or that that are outside the like need to know little circle, who is or is not playing. Like, so that in a way that's relevant, but in another way it's also irrelevant, because it's not like, that's not an element of a federal crime. It's against the rules of the NBA. And so if you violate those, the NBA will, maybe ban you for life, suspend you, whatever. Like, unless we get total exoneration here, I think Billups is kind of cooked as a member of the NBA going forward. So like, that doesn't really matter that if he was tipping, because for like his legal status, but for his NBA status, it definitely does, because that's exactly the kind of thing you're told never to do, separate from like betting on the results of your team, which is not alleged here at any point with respect to Billups. You know what I mean? Like, from the NBA's perspective, it's just like, well, open and shut.
I guess you could say it's open and shut, but what do you think is different? I mean, one, how firm is what Seth Partnow was saying? How firm is you shouldn't be sharing this information? Is it a mandate? Because what is it? Like, it's mandated that players in the NBA can't bet on their own sport. essentially. They're not just their own games, but their own sport. But like, so does it cross the boundaries of saying like you can't talk to people about anything with this job? If you're saying let's use it to coaches, staff members, doesn't that cross into the realm of when people would argue, well, this is what you can't tell pro athletes that they can't bet on other sports? That you're just telling people that they can't interact with people in their everyday lives or have, it's not, I mean, you're not, I know injury information is a closely guarded secret now, but you're not actually working for this fucking CIA, and you need ultra top clearance, like security clearance to get this info. And also it's info that's being I'm not defending this. I'm just trying to like play devil's advocate to, they just shouldn't share this information. And that in itself is damning. It's damning to me if Ernest is the person he physically shared it to.
No, I think
for sure.
You're right to focus on that element of it is kind of like again, this is not going to be, well, this might be an argument you'd make if you're trying to prosecute a case against him, is like, what did he reasonably think this person was going to do with this information based on what he knew of him, what you could establish about his character and like sort of what he was into? Like, I think it's a pretty easy, like it's difficult. It would be difficult for Billups to say, like, how was I supposed to know what, like, I never thought for a second that information might be used for something in particular. You know what I mean? Like that, it's a tough pill to swallow, a tough argument to make.
The other thing I struggle to separate with, and maybe we could save this for the Damon Jones talk or segment of it too, but how is this different? You could say it gives certain bettors, because in this situation, who is the victim? It's the sports book specifically, right? You're not hurting your team because you're not Billups. Now, if Billups says, I'm benching Dame specifically, like, so that I can give this, that we're veering into the integrity of the sport thing. But how is this different from if people are using algorithms to place their, like these, like, how is it different from it where they're or they're paying for someone else's advice on how to do this? Or how is it different from just, well, sports books are trying to gain advantages over the consumers because if you're too successful, like, they can kind of cut you off. So I understand that it's a terrible look given the source he gave it to, but just the relaying of information to me, that information is going to come out anyway. That feels more like the flow of information. That feels more like an NBA problem. It's, well, then you should force, is it too much to ask to either have like the injury reports need to just be due earlier so we know that this is, and you can't change them, no more game time decisions or something? And I know that sounds stupid. There might be late scratches then. I think those would still be allowed. But if you are getting in bed with sports books as partnerships, and this is something, if you as the NBA view this as a cardinal sin, let's forget about the gambling, like the poker part of this. If you view the flow of information here as a cardinal sin or just taboo, then maybe you need to look at your protocol for how injury information is handled and guarded while you're also going to be in bed with sports books.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it feels unsolvable independent of there just not being sports gambling. Because you're right, the only reason it matters if there's a late scratch, assuming there's a good reason for it, is to gamblers and to the house, right? Like, so if that element weren't involved, like, you could say whatever you wanted, right? Because I don't know, like, people buying tickets for the game that night might be pissed if Dame got benched for no reason or whatever. Not that, which isn't what happened here. That's the other thing that's kind of funny about this is, like, everybody knew the Blazers were tanking and nobody, like, they were routinely sitting guys all the time. So,
honestly,
like,
isn't it a bigger deal that the secondary market, or the secondary ticket market after LeBron's like fake out of the decision part two, that those tickets went through the roof? And look, people have their own agency. They decided to pay above market value, but they went and spent all this money on the final game, home game of the regular season for the Lakers. That, to me, that feels like a bigger deal than a team that's tanking. You found out a little earlier than other people that their star player or one of their players wasn't going to play that night.
It's not a perfect use of this term, but I think the reason that it's still concerning, aside from the person to whom the information was allegedly leaked by Billups, the problem is, like, well, if those channels are open, then there's at least the opportunity for what didn't seem to happen here, but could, if you're worst case scenarioing this, where you do have someone in a position to make lineup decisions that is then manipulating the lineup for purposes of betting, right? Like that, which isn't what happened. Like the fact that that channel of communication exists, it opens up that possibility if you have bad actors or you have people that are incentivized to behave that way. And maybe that's why the whole like somewhat unrealistic expectation of like no tipping, can't, got to be totally tight-lipped about all this type of stuff. If you're a trainer, if you're a coach, if you're a player, like maybe that's why it just exists, is like you have to make that the rule, or at least I don't know if it's like this, if it's a hard and fast rule that's punishable by like death right away, or if it's just like, hey, this is among the stuff that we'll look at if you get caught as the NBA and potentially punish you for. Like that needs to be there just because the potential for like a much worse version of what we see here in the Billups situation is possible, right? Like that you see what I'm saying? Like it's you have the rule in place to prevent like something much worse than what happened here.
Doesn't it come back to what we talked about with Rozier, when it's not just intent, but the incentive for that intent? Because Billups would be another one where it's what was his incentive to do this specifically? Was he indebted to this person? Again, we're veering into speculation, which I don't necessarily want us to have to, although that's pretty much our entire job at this point. And so I'm not trying to condone this by playing devil's advocate either. I just don't. The intent matters more to me than the flow of information, I guess, is really where I land.
Sure, of course. Yeah, right.
Finally, before we, I guess, lean into an overarching discussion about sports betting, we have the Damon Jones allegations, which are sort of just similar to what's going on with Rozier, except that it seems like he sold like specific tidbits of information and there were dollar amounts assigned to it. So he was identified in the indictment as a teammate or coach of a prominent NBA player, a.k.a. Grant, Player 3. Remember that. Indictment says that Damon Jones used his relationship with Player 3 to get information that he sold to gamblers. Among the examples given were, in February of 2023, he allegedly found out Player 3 would not play in the Lakers' game against the Bucks and told an unnamed co-conspirator to place a, quote, big bet on the Bucks because Player 3 was out. Player 3 wasn't on the injury report at the time, and then LeBron James did not play in that game. This is how everyone connected the dots and decided it was LeBron James. League sources told The Athletic's Joe Vardon and Mike Vorkunov that LeBron had no knowledge of this, that what Damon Jones was doing. Then in January of 2024, Jones allegedly sold info on another top Lakers player, that one isn't quoted from the indictment, after learning, quote, from a trainer that the player was hurt and his minutes or performance would be affected. The defendant, Marbs Fairley, bet $100,000 against the Lakers for that game, and the injury report simply said that the player in question was probable. The Lakers won that game, and the player ended up playing to form. Fairley asked Jones for his money back, which was $2,500 for the flow of the information was the cost. And that is the player, I believe, that everyone assumes is Anthony Davis, or that they've identified Damon Jones was passing injury information on Anthony Davis and LeBron James. Do you have any like further extrapolated thoughts on this compared to what was going on with Bill? Because in this, I mean, in the indictment on Billups, it doesn't seem like you can question the intent just because of the earnest being linked to the two separate things. You would have to believe that Billups is being wrongfully accused in both instances. Mm-hmm. In this one, it's more clear-cut. It wasn't just the flow. He was being compensated for the flow of information. With Billups, was he selling the information? Was he trying to was he getting a cut of the people who were capitalizing on this information? This seems a little bit more cut and dry than that.
Yeah, I agree. It's more cut and dry, and it feels worse if you're just like ranking them. Like the Rozier thing is the biggest problem. This is the second biggest because it is just you are selling inside information for gambling purposes, and then the Billups one is third. Cut and dried is the right way to put this. If all these allegations are proven true, there's text message stuff alluded to so it's just kind of it does seem to be what it looks like. Again, though, this is what I'm talking about, is like this is what you're concerned about with the escape of or the release of information that should be in-house, and which it's only a problem if you're allowed to gamble on these games, because who gives a shit if LeBron James is or isn't playing in a game, or it's not. I shouldn't say that. It's not nearly as big of a potential problem if Damon Jones is leaking who is or isn't playing in a given Lakers game. If there's not this way to profit off of that information. So maybe that's the segue into the more overarching discussion.
I think the question is just, what is the issue at hand here? Is it just, should sports betting be legal? Is it like, what is the actual, it's the integrity of the game. And that's of sport in general. Because if people there are people who already think that let's just focus on the NBA. They think that the NBA is scripted. If that actually becomes a prevailing consensus to where you believe that what you're watching has already been predetermined, that's a real problem. I don't know that anything we've discussed here rises to that level. I think the question becomes, does anything we've here make you think that at some point it could rise to that level? And it also then goes into, like, what are your personal beliefs when it comes to the legalization of sports betting and the way it's offered, the way it can be used?
I guess I kind of think this stuff will, if you already are of the mind that this is all fixed, or you're conspiratorially minded, or whatever, this is just more info or more ammo, I guess, or more support for that opinion. I'm not sure what we've got so far is going to take a person that believes the league is competitively pure, or very close to that. Tanking is what it is, but will get you into the camp of, oh, these games are fixed, like en masse. Like we can't trust the results. The integrity is compromised. I don't know that this is enough to get you from A to B. I think it's just, it will reinforce your position if you already are like, it's all fixed and all rigged, which is, personally, that always just, again, there's probably some self-defense in this. Like I deeply want to believe that everything's on the up and up, but that sort of thinking like, oh, the refs have it in for this team, or this game was rigged, or, this draft pick was manipulated, that always just, with no real evidence, it's all a lot of coincidental stuff.
Oh no, it's lazy. It's lazy analysis. If you're saying it as a joke or whatever, yeah, I find it funny sometimes too. But it's just right. Especially if you're not. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to read that case that you're going to make, but like, you need to make like a real argument behind it, and invariably there's almost just no real evidence behind. You start asking why or how, and the arguments just completely fall apart.
Or what are the incentives? Now with gambling, you can say, well, the incentive was financial. There's this money to be made over here. Or I don't know, some people just need to get addicted to it, and it's not about the money, it's about the rush, it's about the edge, it's about the dopamine, whatever. So that's kind of my thought on, like, does it affect your view on the competitive integrity? It's kind of, you think what you think. I don't feel like this is going to move you one way or the other necessarily. I guess the next thing to get to is, like, what do you do about this? Like, is this a widespread problem, or do you, and if so, what's the solve? Like, is this a problem? Like, that's the other thing here. Like, is this a big enough deal? We already led this off with, like, we're skeptical of the administration that is spearheading this investigation, just as a starting point. But if this is a real issue, what do you do? Like, what is the role of gambling going forward? And can it change if that's how you think this gets solved?
I don't know how you change it if you're going to allow betting on player props. And that's been the thing. There's the NCAA ban put on them. I do think when you say that, it sounds better in theory than in practice. Looking at this from a business perspective, not getting into my personal beliefs on it, I don't think people understand how much the prop betting market contributes to overall sports betting. I think in 2024, the estimate was that it was 50% of all legal bets placed. That is a huge part of your business share as sports books, as the league who is partnered with these sports books, to just wipe away. I think you can more closely guard the flow of information, but isn't that just going to make this more of a saga when it does get out? I think if you're looking at this and wondering how to or improve it, short of actually banning player props, which I think fix some of it, but not all of it,
I don't know what the answer is. I don't think that there is an answer. You're never going to weed it out in time. Look, the illegal sports betting market is still $1 billion industry every year, even though it's legalized in basically 40 states at this point. And the thing I would push back is why this, not you specifically, but the beliefs in general, this is what we're talking about. It is a problem, but to me, it's also a theoretical problem when you're looking at it through the NBA's lens in particular. The Terry Rozier situation specifically opens up the possibility, as we just mentioned before, that these contracts have not gotten so lucrative that for most of these players that could impact the game if they pulled themselves out or they alter their own performance, it leaves open the possibility that, no, this could happen. Like, this legitimately could happen. But it hasn't happened yet. It happened with Terry Rozier, we think, on a team in the Charlotte Hornets that season that wasn't, like, it wasn't LeBron James pulling himself off of the Lakers. I'm not saying it needs to rise to Nikola Jokic doing something with the Nuggets. So it is an issue, but I do think a lot of this is trying to project forward, which leads me to my final point here. That should be part of all this, is that so much of I don't bet on sports. Like, I just don't. It's not something that, like, interests me. I understand why people do it. It helps them lock in on games. I get it. This podcast wouldn't exist without sports betting advertisements. Like, we just negotiated a deal with a sports book. Like, this is the nature of the business. We're all we're hypocrites to some extent. I'm willing to, like, we could talk about that if we need to. But when we talk about problem gambling, so much comes down to the reaction, the treatment of it, how many resources are being devoted to detecting when these bets are happening or to treat people who report having problem gambling. There probably needs to be more preventive measures in place. And when it comes to sports betting in general, like that, the same way, or at least when you and I came up, it was we were educated on, like, the perils of alcohol or tobacco. Like, it probably needs to be the same way. Like, that education needs to start young so that when you are exposed to all of this, you have a better idea of what you're getting into and you're not just subjected to all these advertisements, or even more so, I don't know how much ads actually impact. They could be predatory, I'm sure. I don't know how much I haven't seen an ad and be like, oh yeah, like, you got to use that promo code and we go bet on sports. I think the bigger danger is when you're looking at the individual is coming up in a culture to where it's just so ingrained into the fandom of sports that that's how you're grandfathered into it. And I think that probably starts with more education, which leads to more prevention. But when you're looking at it from the NBA specifically, I don't know how so much of this just operates on good faith. It's on a smaller scale. If we say you and I are going to sit down and record this podcast at 10 a.m. Pacific time, I trust that you're going to be there. There's really not much else I could do about it. Am I going to send someone to your house and watch you 24/7?
I really hate it when you do that.
I have to do it sometimes. So you're notoriously flaky. And that's what I struggle with, is because if your argument is sports betting shouldn't be legal, and the people it impacts, not just the leagues, not just the $1 million athletes, but the people who are providing you content you and I are capitalizing off of this. If you're okay with that, maybe even impacting yourself, to where then I think that's an acceptable stance to take. But there's also the discussion to be had about, well, is that reasonable? Because you have to be pragmatic about all this too. Is it trendy to sit here and say ban player props or sports betting shouldn't be legal? But is that realistic? And I don't think any of that's realistic, because one, illegal gambling is always going to exist. And I do think to some extent regulated markets are safer. Maybe there need to be more safeguards when it comes to advertisements, like I already said, or the way that they target customers, for sure. But would we have detected this if it was all happening through offshore online bookies, or if it was just physical bookies? Probably not. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say I understand both sides, but I understand both sides, and I just don't have a perfect answer.
I don't have one either. I think one thing, if we're looking to be solution oriented, if we concede that this is a problem, based on these latest reports, the player prop side of it.
Can I ask you a question though? Is it this what we're talking about is a problem? But do you think the NBA has more of a macro problem with? I want to focus on the Terry Rozier stuff, or even if you think that coaches are selling information to capitalize off that, do you think that is actually a widespread problem in the NBA? Right? The idea of it is a problem. What we're talking about right now is a problem. Do you think that the NBA actually has this specific problem on a scale to where it's problematic?
I do not. I think, but what I think it has among, again, people that are predisposed to think this way is a perception problem, is an optics problem now, because this is something you can point to if you want to make the case that the NBA is rigged, which I don't believe it is. I think the fact that Terry Rozier getting allegedly, I don't know, getting caught on a few $100,000 a couple years ago would suggest to me that if there was a larger problem, that would have been caught too, because that is some small potatoes stuff based on like who it was, when it was, how much it was for. Again, that makes it feel like, the fact that somebody got caught doing this is proof that it isn't a problem. I can grant you that that's like a tenuous argument to make. So no, I don't think it's a real a widespread issue, but I think in the way that it's being perceived, yeah, that's kind of the bigger deal at the moment.
And perception matters. I don't want to discuss that element of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the bigger part of this unless more comes out, which who knows. I'm skeptical that more will. If we're trying to be solution oriented, I do think there's a case that curbing or eliminating player props goes a really long way. And I think it's one that, because of what we know about gambling and what you talked about a moment ago, like it is essentially, like, for some people, scientifically an addiction. That is why there's disclaimers on almost every advertisement for it. Some people have difficulty moderating that behavior. So if that is true, and we sort of know now that it is, eliminating player props is not going to cost these books any money, because these people are going to find other stuff to gamble on. I just, like, you know what I mean? If you want to do it and you have the means to do it, you're just going to pick something else. You're going to pick what's available. I don't think there's a meaningful share of business that will be lost, and the NBA cares about this too. But for these books in particular, if you just said, we're going to severely limit or eliminate player props, because if you want to gamble, you're still going to do it. You'll bet on the team. They'll find other ways to make that money back. I don't think that's like a nuclear option. It's like, it seems like a fairly clean solve for a lot of the problem. For the Rozier stuff in particular is what I'm talking about.
And because, like, honestly, one of the problems that we're either dancing around, where we're getting to the heart of, is just the accessibility of it all. Is because not only is it so easy to do this from your phone in the middle of the games, but it's all these props are not. It used to be, remember when we were coming up, it was these props are available mostly just for football and they're for like these big games. And now there's just such nuanced player props. And so I would agree with what you're saying, that people would find other ways to still bet on sports and that the bottom line may not be impacted that much. But I almost wonder if we're running into, so it's been in 2018 is when the PAPSA Act was overturned by the Supreme Court, and each state had the ability to now individually legalize sports betting. Are we getting to the point that we saw with streaming services, to where this has been such a growth market and now you have to figure out a way to continue growing, and the only way to continue growing is to offer more of these options? And I'm not condoning that. I'm just wondering if what you're saying sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
It sounds unrealistic, knowing that, well, okay, like, might not be impacted much, but it's still going to be impacted, and we answer to shareholders, so we can't allow that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Like, the idea that, like, well, you won't lose any money is a good argument. It kind of falls apart when it's like, well, growth is always, we forget staying even. We want to figure out ways to make more. You can't take this avenue to make more away from us. We need to come up. Not only do we need to keep player props, we need to find other ways, like to make the pile bigger. That's a good argument. I think, like, you would have to threaten something more severe to get that concession from a lot of these books, probably. And I don't know that, just to keep it sort of local, the NBA should, like, I don't know that that's the league's responsibility, because they're trying to grow revenue too, and the gambling partnerships are a huge driver of that. I don't know if they should have to threaten anything, or if I very much doubt that they would, unless there was some kind of compulsion to do that.
And the two final things I'll add, well, maybe even the three final things, is one, this changes if more names come out, which it felt like was it the deputy at AG, or what was it, Patel himself said it would. If it doesn't, that's only going to lead to my further skepticism of why was this such a dog and pony show. Two, the NBA doesn't get to like cry foul here at all. Like Adam Silver inextricably tied this league to sports betting when that op-ed however many years ago, like you just have to eat the crow on this. And two, because we didn't talk about it, if all this stuff is true, Chauncey Billups and like, yeah, ban them. Like you
Done.
bring
Yeah.
the hammer down. Like it's we went through this with the Clippers stuff is you need to set a precedent to if the money these players are making clearly isn't going to, in the moment, isn't going to dissuade them from doing it, show that, well, it's going to impact like your future livelihood then too. And so if this all turns out to be true, you're not going to hear me, oh, like, well, Chauncey Billups, no. You could argue that Chauncey Billups didn't even deserve this job that he has right now. So those would be the final things I would add. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on this. I do hope I don't know that we came to any mega conclusions, but I hope people at least appreciate that we were trying to be honest. This is it's a tough thing, and I don't have perfect answers, only terrible takes as normal.
Same. That's going to do it. Thanks everybody for listening, for watching, rate, review, subscribe, do all that stuff. Let us know what your thoughts are. I know this is a real like thorny, complicated issue. So just ripe for comments, I would say. Tell your
Use
friends,
code
tell your
Frankie
enemies.
Smokes to get
I would like to bet on Frank Ntilikina being unfairly excluded from the NBA. Shouts
we
to
do
him. Apologies, Jared Allen.